Greetings, cinema and AI lovers. Welcome to the new episode of Artifinema Cinetelligence. How are you? We want to inform you that this episode may contain spoiler. Today, we're jumping into quite a significant film, actually. A real landmark piece of cyberpunk cinema that, maybe more than any actual tech at the time, really shaped how people thought about virtual reality. We're talking about the 1992 sci-fi horror film, The Lawnmower Man.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to look back now and maybe just see the early digital effects called a relic, but it's so much more than that. It's like a foundational text for understanding how we started imagining AI, immersive tech. So our mission today really is to dig into the source material, unpack how this film tackles digital aesthetics, consciousness, the body, and crucially, the director Brett Leonard's vision, which was, well, surprisingly prophetic.
And when we say prophetic, we really mean it. We've got sources confirming that actual tech leaders, big names like Palmer Luckey, the Oculus guy, he actually cited this movie as a key inspiration for even getting into VR development. So Leonard wasn't just like making a movie, he was almost accidentally defining the visual language, the whole concept of the metaverse, decades early.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it that way. And that's why it deserves this kind of deep dive. Because, okay, yeah, the visuals might feel very 1992 now, a bit of a time capsule maybe.
A bit.
Okay, very 1992. But the core ideas, the questions it asks about human augmentation, the dangers of military co-option of technology, what digital reality even is, those are still incredibly relevant now, maybe even more so with generative AI and, the headsets we're seeing today.
Okay, so let's ground ourselves first. We need the basics. Where did this film come from? The context.
Right. Let's set the stage. The Lawnmower Man, it hit U.S. theaters March 6th, 1992. And genre-wise, it's a bit of a mix, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets tagged as cyberpunk, obviously, but there's definite horror elements, sci-fi for sure, and even like a tragic arc for Job.
Exactly. It pulls from all of those. And runtime, you'll usually see two versions. The theatrical cut is about 1 hour, 48 minutes.
Yeah.
But the director's cut, which I think is kind of essential if you want the full philosophical act,
Yeah, definitely.
that one's much longer, about 141 minutes. It really fleshes out Job's transformation, gives it more room to breathe.
And who is behind it? Key people.
Well, the director, Brett Leonard, he also co-wrote the script with Gimel Everett. And the cast.
Yeah.
It's pretty notable. You've got Pierce Brosnan. This is pre-Bond Brosnan, remember?
Right, before he was 007.
Playing Dr. Lawrence Angelo, the sort of obsessed scientist driving the plot. And then Jeff Fahey as Job Smith, the gardener. And his performance is just, it's quite something. He really carries that transformation.
He really does. And Jenny Wright as Marnie Burke, completing that main trio.
Now, critical reception. This is where it gets interesting. It's, let's say, polarizing.
That's putting it mildly, right? The scores aren't exactly stellar.
No. On IMDb, it's sitting at a 5.4 out of 10, which, that's from over 41,000 user ratings, so it's not insignificant. But the Metascore, the one that pulls in critic reviews, that's even lower, down at 42.
Ouch.
Yeah. But, that kind of critical split, it's pretty common for genre films that are maybe pushing boundaries visually or thematically, maybe sacrificing a bit of narrative slickness to explore really out there ideas.
And you absolutely cannot talk about the reception without getting into the Stephen King connection, or lack thereof, eventually.
Oh, absolutely not. That whole controversy is a key context.
Yeah.
The film was marketed, heavily marketed, as Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man.
But King hated it, right? He sued them.
He did. Successfully sued to get his name taken off the title, off the marketing materials entirely. Basically, the producers owned the film rights to King's short story, which, yes, was also called The Lawnmower Man, but that's pretty much where the similarity ended.
What was King's original story even about?
Oh, it's pure King weirdness. Very different vibe. It's about, like, a magic lawnmower, this naked guy who eats grass. Got really visceral growth-out horror elements. There's famously a bit involving a severed body part in a bird bath. Classic King.
Okay, so not much overlap with VR and AI transcendence then.
Almost none. Leonard and Everett basically took the title, maybe the barest hint of a character setup, and just grafted their own completely different story onto this whole vision about AI, digital godhood, virtual reality. It was a massive departure.
And King felt, that it damaged his brand?
Pretty much. He felt they were using his name for a story that had nothing to do with his work, hence the lawsuit. Although, to be fair, the filmmakers did throw in one little Easter egg nod to the original.
A lawnmower kill.
Telekinetic lawnmower kill, yeah. There's a chase, it gets violent, yeah, some bits do end up in the bird bath.
Yeah.
But the core of the movie, Angela's experiments, Joby becoming this digital entity, all the AI stuff that was purely Brett Leonard's baby, inspired by the actual VR tech he was seeing in the late 80s.
And regardless of what the critics thought, or what King thought, the film was actually a pretty big deal at the time, wasn't it? A hit.
Oh, commercially, it did really well. Our sources call it a big indie hit. But maybe even more importantly, it had this huge cultural impact. It's widely credited, like almost universally, with popularizing the term virtual reality globally.
It gave people a picture, didn't it? Something concrete, even if exaggerated, to latch onto for this tech that was mostly just theory for the average person.
Exactly that. It became the visual reference point. And that ties into something we should probably define, this idea of the diegetic prototype.
Okay, explain that.
So a diegetic prototype is basically a fictional technology shown in media, like the VR and the Lawnmower Man, that ends up shaping how people in the real world think about and expect the actual technology to be.
Ah, so the movie version influences the real-world development because it sets expectations.
Precisely. Even though the VR in the film was way beyond what 1992 tech could actually do, the movie presented it with this kind of real-world authority. It made the idea of VR seem tangible, powerful, maybe a little scary, and that accelerated the cultural imagination. It arguably pushed researchers, investors, the public to take VR more seriously because now there was this exciting, if fictional blueprint.
That makes perfect sense. And it leads us right into the core of the film, how it actually approaches AI and this whole notion of VR. This is where things get really interesting conceptually.
Yeah, the central premise kicks off with Dr. Lawrence Angelo, played by Brosnan. He's brilliant, ambitious, but his ethics are maybe a bit flexible.
Understatement.
He's not just doing regular computer science. He's deep into experiments using VR simulations,
Yeah.
but also combining them with mind-altering drugs, cognitive therapies, basically trying to create super intelligent beings.
And his initial goal is pretty dark, right? Military applications.
Initially, yeah. He's working for the shop, this shadowy organization we'll get more into later. And his first subjects are chimpanzees, aiming to create super smart soldiers, essentially.
As you do, and inevitably, the chimp experiments go wrong. Classic sci-fi trope.
Of course. Gotta have the rogue chimp.
Mm.
So after that disaster, Angelo pivots. He decides to try his experiment on a human subject, Job Smith, the local gardener, who's portrayed as simple, kind-hearted, but significantly learning disabled. And this is where the AI transcendence plot really takes off.
And Job's change is just exponential. It's not subtle.
Not at all. It happens in these distinct phases. First, just raw intelligence. He goes from struggling to read to like absorbing all human knowledge practically overnight. A genius.
Then come the powers.
Then the powers, telekinesis, psychic abilities.
Yeah.
The film suggests the VR treatments didn't just make him smarter, they somehow unlocked these latent human potentials, things hidden in our minds.
And the final stage, the big one.
The God complex, full-blown. He starts seeing himself as evolving beyond humanity, aiming to discard his physical body entirely, become pure energy, and upload himself into the global computer network. To basically become the ghost in the machine, but like running the whole show.
What's so wild is how much this wasn't just pulled from thin air. You mentioned Leonard was inspired by actually trying early VR.
Directly. He tried some of the very first, very crude VR systems in the late 80s and was just blown away by the potential. And then because the movie was such a hit and talked about VR so explicitly, he sort of accidentally became this spokesperson for the tech. He ended up on panels with actual researchers, bridging that gap between Hollywood fantasy and, Silicon Valley R&D.
So he had a front row seat to the emerging ideas.
Absolutely. And that allowed him to bake in some genuinely prophetic stuff. The film pretty accurately predicts VR being used for immersive gaming. That's exactly why Palmer Luckey pointed to it.
But it's deeper than just games, isn't it? The film seems to suggest VR could fundamentally change us, unlock things.
That's the really deep philosophical current here. Leonard presents AI and VR not just as tools, but as pathways, almost, to something ancient within us. Job himself has this incredible line after he's become super intelligent. He tells Angelo something like,
Oh, I remember this bit. It's powerful.
Yeah, he says, it's not new. I realize that nothing we've been doing is new. We haven't been tapping into new areas of the brain. We've just been awakening the most ancient. He goes on, this technology is simply a route to powers that conjurers and alchemists used centuries ago.
Wow, so connecting this bleeding edge 1992 CGI tech back to alchemy and shamanism, that completely reframes it. It's not just code, it's tapping into something primal.
Exactly. It turns the digital space into something potentially spiritual, maybe even ritualistic. Job's journey isn't just about processing power. It's a kind of digital shamanism. The tech becomes the key to unlocking these deep-seated, maybe forgotten human abilities, the power to shape reality with thought. It's a very different take than just seeing AI as, a better calculator.
And this philosophical depth seems to feed into how Leonard thought about storytelling itself, especially comparing traditional film to what VR could be. He talked about moving from storytelling to story worlding.
Yes, this is a really key distinction, especially for anyone interested in cinema theory or how new media change our experience. Traditional film, what he calls storytelling, is all about the frame. The director controls exactly what you see, guides you along this very linear path, a narrative clothesline, as he put it. A leads to B, leads to C. The focus is tightly controlled. Story, character, emotion.
Okay, so that's the standard movie experience. How does story worlding differ for VR?
Story worlding moves beyond the frame. Because in VR, there isn't really a frame in the same way, you're inside it. So instead of just telling a linear story, you have to build a complete detailed world, a sandbox, essentially. The narrative doesn't just play out, it sort of bubbles up as the user explores and interacts.
So the emphasis shifts.
Completely. Leonard suggested the hierarchy flips. In VR, it becomes more like emotion, which is embedded in the environment itself, right arrow interaction, with characters, objects, the world, right arrow story discovery. You piece the story together through your experience within the world. The goal is presence, feeling like you're actually there.
It sounds much more like, well, like a game in a way. You have agency, you're exploring.
Exactly. He used this great analogy. Instead of being handed one single narrative clothesline, VR gives you multiple clotheslines hanging in the world. And you, the participant, get to wander over, try on the clothes on that line, follow that thread, see where it leads. But for that to work, the world itself has to feel convincingly real, or at least internally consistent, even if it's a psychedelic cyberworld.
Which connects to another film concept, right? Off-screen space.
Yeah, that's a term from classical film theory. Off-screen space is everything happening outside the camera's view that the director chooses not to show you. Often it's the mundane stuff, the transitions, the boring bits, brushing teeth, walking down a hallway.
Stuff usually cut out.
Right. But Leonard argued that VR, true immersive VR, needs that off-screen space to be filled in. To feel truly present, the world needs that mundane detail, that sense that it exists continuously, even when you're not looking at something important. Job's journey feels more impactful because the digital realms he enters feel like places, not just backgrounds for plot points.
Okay, let's talk about the actual VR machines we see in the movie, because there are two very different setups, and they seem to represent opposing ideas.
Oh, definitely. The contrast is stark and very deliberate. First, you have Dr. Angelo's main setup, centered around the phlogiston chair.
Phlogiston? Isn't that like an old debunked science theory about fire?
Exactly. It was this idea of a fire-like element, phlogiston, being released during combustion. Using that name suggests something transformative, maybe elemental, alchemical even. And the sequence is using this chair, generally about learning, Job getting smarter, positive cognitive enhancement. Visually, it's presented as relatively safe, constructive. It's Angelo's utopian dream of betterment through tech.
The West Coast Dream, as the source called it. But then there's the other one, the big, scary one used by the shop.
The gyroscopic VR apparatus.
Yeah.
That thing is pure intimidation. It's designed for aggression, conflict simulation, external control. Job gets strapped into the center of these spinning rings.
It looks like a torture device.
It really does. It's almost like a dark parody of Da Vinci's Vitruvian man at the center of the system, but totally constrained and subjected to the machine. Where the chair allows for internal exploration, the gyrosphere forces this external, often violent interaction.
And I read that filming in that thing was actually awful.
Apparently, yeah. Sources say it was incredibly difficult to operate and notoriously nausea-inducing for Jeff Fahey and anyone else who had to be strapped in. So ironically, the intimidating future tech was a real-world pain.
But narratively, the contrast is the point.
Absolutely. The comfy chair versus the spinning gyroscope of doom. It spells out the film's core message. The technology itself isn't inherently good or bad. The threat comes from the ideology behind its use specifically, the militaristic drive of the shop trying to weaponize it. It's that classic sci-fi conflict, utopian potential versus dystopian control.
The fear isn't the VR, it's who controls the VR. People who value cold logic and power over, well, maybe the human element.
Exactly. Cold cerebralism, and a disregard for the body, as one analysis put it. Which leads us perfectly into talking about Job's actual ascent into the digital world and the look of it all. Because let's be honest, when people think Lawnmower Man, they think of those visuals.
Oh, yeah. The CGI. It's memorable. Often described now as maybe garish or primitive.
Nightmare-inducing primitive CGI was one quote I saw. And look, compared to today, yeah, it looks dated. But you absolutely have to put it in historical context to appreciate the sheer ambition.
What was the context in '92?
It was, and this is a great phrase from a source, the wild, wild west of computer animation. To give you an idea of the scale, the Lawnmower Man, made on a relatively small budget of around $5–6 million, attempted 23 minutes of digital visual effects.
23 minutes? That's a lot for back then, especially on that budget.
It's massive. Now, compare that to, say, Terminator 2, which came out the year before and blew everyone away with its CGI. T2 had maybe 7 minutes of digital effects.
Yeah.
But it had a budget of like $120 million.
Ooh. Okay, so Leonard was punching way, way above his weight budget-wise.
Completely. They were trying to do 3 times the amount of CGI as T2 on a tiny fraction of the budget. The companies involved, like Xalis Inc. and Angel Studios, were literally having to write their own software from scratch to make these sequences possible. They were pioneers, forced by ambition and lack of resources.
So that famous look, the sort of blocky, abstract, psychedelic style, that wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was almost a necessity.
It was both, really. Leonard was smart about it. He knew that the actual VR tech available then didn't look realistic. It was low-res, often wireframe, very abstract. So leaning into a stylized psychedelic aesthetic, as he called it, made sense. It fit the subject matter, and it cleverly masked the technical limitations. They couldn't do photorealism, so they went for surrealism.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about the villains pulling the strings behind the scenes. The Shop.
Right, the Shop. They embody that controlling, militaristic ideology we talked about. They're the shadowy corporation funding Angelo, but with their own agenda. And trivia point. The name The Shop is famously used for the sinister government agency in Stephen King's Firestarter 2, adding to that vibe of conspiracy and unethical science.
And their goal with Job isn't enlightenment, it's weaponization.
Exactly. They secretly swap Angelo's cognitive-enhancing drugs for something designed to increase aggression. Their plan is to hijack the project, turn Job into the ultimate cyber soldier, an invincible war machine, capable of hacking systems, controlling machines, causing chaos.
And this desire for a controllable weapon links back to that idea of cold cerebralism, right? It's anti-body almost.
Very much so. Their approach is contrasted with the more holistic, even spiritual potential Angelo initially envisioned. Which brings us to another interesting theoretical split often discussed in cyberpunk, the difference between cyberspace and SimStim.
Okay, break those down for us. They sound like something out of William Gibson.
They pretty much are.
Yeah.
Gibson's work is key here. Cyberspace is typically imagined as this purely mental realm, a consensual hallucination, experienced as data. It often implies an escape from the body, leaving the meat behind to become pure mind, pure information.
Disembodiment, essentially. And SimStim.
SimStim, short for simulated stimulation, is kind of the opposite. It's about using technology to intensify sensory experience, to make the virtual feel incredibly real, tactile, embodied. It's about flesh input, making the simulation deeply physical.
So where does the Lawnmower Man's VR fall? Because Job does eventually want to become pure energy, leave his body. That sounds like cyberspace.
You think so from the end goal. But the experience of VR in the film leans heavily towards SimStim. Look at how it's portrayed. It's constantly emphasizing the physical. Job doesn't just get smarter abstractly. His body physically transforms. He gets stronger, fitter, becomes a super buff stud muffin, as one source delightfully put it.
Right. The physical change is part of the upgrade.
And his experiences in VR are intensely sensory. That infamous virtual sex scene, noted as the first in film history, is all about tactile sensation, embodied connection in the digital space. It's driven by haptic feedback, what things feel like.
So the argument is that the path to transcendence is through the body, through heightened sensation, even if the destination is beyond it.
Precisely. And crucially, actions in VR have devastating physical consequences in the real world. Think about the attack on Marnie in the gyrosphere. Job assaults her mind digitally through the VR interface, but the result is real physical and psychological trauma. She's left catatonic, insensible. The film hammers home. This isn't just a game. The digital affects the physical profoundly. The body matters.
The film even visually reinforces this idea, contrasting the immersive VR with old-school computer learning, right? There's that specific scene.
Oh, the anti-computer sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's aesthetically really clever. Job is trying to learn rapidly, using this conventional computer program like an encyclopedia on a screen. And the visual language is deliberately jarring. He's facing this flat, finite, square monitor.
A box. Limitation.
Exactly, compared to the limitless, seemingly infinite vistas of the VR sequences. And the experience itself is shown as cold, purely data-driven. The information flashes faster and faster, becoming this overwhelming, garbled stream of geometric shapes and images. It's alienating, representing information overload without real understanding or embodiment.
It's Leonard basically saying, see, just cramming data into the brain isn't the same as experiencing knowledge spatially,
Huh.
physically.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Yeah.
It's a clear visual argument. Standard computers are limited, isolated. VR is expansive, immersive, and fundamentally tied to embodied experience.
Yeah. By the way, if you liked and interested so far, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It's really important for us to continue this series.
Okay, so picking up on that embodiment theme, this resistance to the idea of just escaping the body, becoming pure data, that seems like a really central philosophical point the film is making.
It absolutely is. And this is where we can bring in a slightly more academic concept, phenomenology.
Okay, what's that?
It's a branch of philosophy that studies subjective experience, consciousness. And crucially, it tends to resist that classic Western split between mind and body. Phenomenologists emphasize that our experience of the world is always through our bodies. We are embodied beings.
And you're saying the Lawnmower Man, despite being about digital tech, actually aligns with that. It rejects the mind-body split.
Strongly. A lot of early utopian hype around computers was about finally escaping the limitations of the physical body. But VR films like this one often push back. They focus on re-embodiment.
Re-embodiment, meaning bringing the body into the digital experience or making the digital feel bodily. Both, really. It means the physical body remains central, essential, even in virtual spaces. We see it in Job's physical transformation. He gets smarter and buffer. But more importantly, we see it in the consequences. Digital actions cause physical pleasure, physical pain, lasting trauma. Marnie's experience is the prime example. The VR tag fundamentally alters her physical and mental state. The body isn't left behind. It's the primary interface, the site of experience and consequence.
Which underlines why the film works so well as that diegetic prototype we mentioned earlier. The experiences looked so intense, so physically real, even if stylized.
Exactly. It wasn't just abstract data streams. It was visceral, sensory. That power, even exaggerated, is what cemented the idea of VR in the public mind. It made these claims about transforming the body, connecting minds, even achieving digital immortality. And people bought into the promise of it. The image of Joe becoming pure energy is still able to make phones ring all over the world that became a cultural touchstone for what ultimate digital power might look like.
And Brett Leonard himself seemed very aware of this power, the potential impact of the medium he was visualizing. He got involved in ethics.
He did. He took it quite seriously. He recognized that if VR truly could affect people on this deep, embodied level, then it carried significant responsibility. He talks about how VR can hardwire neurotic pathways, especially in children, changing the brain physiologically.
It's pretty heavy.
It is. And that concern led him to actually work on developing ethical guidelines. He was involved in creating something called the 5 Laws of VR and participated in discussions around the 3 Laws of Human Augmentation Code, led by wearable computing pioneer Dr. Steve Mann.
So trying to steer the ship, basically, ensure this powerful tech develops positively.
Yeah, recognizing that creators have a duty to guide the medium, given its potential to reshape human experience so fundamentally, just as Job's experience was radically and ultimately dangerously reshaped.
Which brings us to maybe Leonard's most unique and potentially controversial idea about VR, his belief that it's a fundamentally feminine medium.
Yes, this is a fascinating concept he talks about. He argues that VR operates best when guided by what he calls feminine principles, which he contrasts with traditional media, like film, which he sees as more aligned with masculine or yang principles.
Okay, let's unpack the yin-yang thing here. Yang is masculine.
Right. In Taoist philosophy, yang represents qualities like activity, speed, hardness, focus, aggression associated with the sun, the sky. Think about a lot of mainstream action cinema. Fast cuts, high impact, narrative drive, conquest. Leonard uses Mad Max. Fury Road is an example of peak yang media. He argues that trying to replicate that intense, fast-cutting style in VR often just doesn't work. It can be disorienting, even nauseating. It breaks the feeling of presence.
Because you're supposed to be in the world, not just having images thrown at you at high speed.
Exactly. Your sense of agency gets overridden. Now, yin, the feminine principle, represents qualities like receptivity, slowness, softness, yielding, intuition associated with the moon, the earth.
Uh,
Leonard's argument is that VR, at its core, is a yin medium. Because true immersion requires you to be receptive to the environment. You're not meant to just blast through it. You're meant to be in it, to let the world wash over you, to discover things slowly, to interact thoughtfully. The experience, he suggests, should prioritize feeling, atmosphere, and gradual discovery over constant action and control.
That's a really different way of thinking about technology and interaction. If the future of immersive media is more about receiving than exerting, about slowness rather than speed, that changes things.
It fundamentally reframes the goals of design and narrative in these spaces. It shifts away from a traditionally masculine model of conquering the digital frontier towards a more feminine model of inhabiting and integrating with it. Which might explain why some of the Lawnmower Man's VR sequences, the slower, more abstract, almost meditative ones, feel strangely effective despite the primitive graphics. They invite that receptive state.
And this ties into Leonard's ultimate hope for VR, doesn't it? Something quite utopian.
Yeah, despite the dark turn the movie takes, his underlying vision seems quite hopeful. He spoke about VR having the potential to be the medium of the global human, a technology that could help us transcend national borders and divisions, fostering a sense of shared experience, global culture, and deep connection.
A yin-driven global consciousness, maybe?
Perhaps. It's quite something, isn't it? That this cyberpunk horror film, full of body horror and digital megalomania, sprang from such, well, idealistic roots in its creator's mind. It really shows the complexity we're dealing with here.
Hey listener, do you have any other idea or question about this? Please write in comments. Ultimately then, The Lawnmower Man. It's got the dated CGI, the Stephen King controversy, the polarizing reviews. But underneath all that, it feels like it was asking incredibly important questions way ahead of its time.
Absolutely prescient. About embodiment, about AI ethics, about who controls technology, about the very nature of reality in a digital age. It hit on so many themes that are still central to our discussions today.
And its legacy isn't just academic. It had a real impact.
Huge impact. Making virtual reality a household phrase is no small feat. And genuinely inspiring people who went on to build the next generation of that technology. You can't ignore that. And, that anecdote about James Cameron.
Oh, right. What was that again?
Leonard apparently met James Cameron, probably around the time T2 was big, maybe a Cannes Film Festival. And Cameron, acknowledging Leonard's film, apparently said something like, "You beat me to virtual reality, you son of a bitch."
Huh. From Cameron, that's high praise indeed.
You really can't get much better than that in terms of filmmaker cred.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've gone pretty deep today. We covered the film's origins, the indie success, the King drama, the specific context of that early 90s CGI.
Yeah, and we really dug into Brett Leonard's whole philosophy, the diegetic prototype idea, how the film shaped expectations, the visual language contrasting the phlogiston chair and the gyrosphere to show that utopian-dystopian split. The focus on phenomenology and SimStim, arguing for the importance of the body, even when you're talking about cyberspace.
And we landed on that really thought-provoking idea from Leonard VR as a potentially feminine medium guided by yin principles of reception and slowness rather than yang principles of action and control.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final question to mull over. If Leonard is right, if the most immersive, potentially transformative digital future demands receptivity, slowness, discovery, how does that fundamentally challenge our usual ways of thinking about progress?
If the dominant narratives in tech, often driven by speed, disruption, control, very yang ideas, are maybe not the best fit for where immersive AI and VR could take us, what does that mean?
How does embracing a more yin approach, emphasizing presence, connection, maybe even a kind of digital empathy, change how we define power, innovation, and ultimately reality itself in this increasingly virtual world?
Something to definitely ponder next time you find yourself stepping into a virtual world.
Indeed.
See you on next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out the video description for the letterbox list with all the movies we've covered in this series. See you next week. Cinema Revals. Bye-bye.